Eric, we talked about my favorite topic today.
The Hobbit.
Us as role playing so I know you're a big fan of the LARPing, so I just want to bring our mutual interest together.
We've talked about this.
You said
there's a caste system.
Right.
I explained this to you, okay? Holding on to my not at the bottom caste system. So I am a fan of tabletop role playing.
Right.
And get it right or pay the price.
Yeah. Get it right or get clapped up. That's actually the saying in tabletop. Well, regardless, I was enthused that we're able to role play successfully Middle Earth characters, and there is a ring here, and the ring is a PR. And the question is, what happens when ouchie time occurs? What happens when you got a boo-boo, right? Mm-hmm. Should you just walk it off? Should you just ignore it? Should you basically never train again? Where someone actually told me, a member at the gym one time, that they had some moderate wrist pain and thus they couldn't do what they wanted, so they just stopped going to the gym for a year. Is that a viable solution? Luckily, we have 3 DPTs here today to talk about, okay, so you got a boo-boo. Now what?
Absolutely. This is a really cool episode. We'll keep it brief because it's a long one. It's a deep one. It's a quality one. You're going to appreciate every entry point that we get into in this, and that'll make sense when we actually get into it. And fair warning, the banter is thick at the start, just the way you like it. So we'll try to keep it minimal in this intro, where I just feel like this episode, God was looking down on it, and we're ready to kick it off. So yeah. None other than DPTs, doctors, Sam Spinelli, Nick Licameli, and Quinn Henoch are joining us on this one to talk about, you are a person with broke. How do we get to the point when that is no longer the condition of the person who you now are, who has it, but not anymore? You're fixed. And what does that look like?
So, Eric, people don't know this, but they wonder all the time, hey, how do we curate these awesome guests on Iron Culture? And sometimes we'll receive DMs, both in our personal and also on Iron Culture, about how to get on the cult. And Eric, do you mind if I share the secret, like the easy way, the one weird trick to get on Iron Cult?
I mean, yes, because I would love to know it. I would like to get on Iron Culture.
Yeah, well, you've been a great guest. Honestly, the episodes
are
amongst my favorites. Okay? Definitely not in the bottom half. It's somewhere. Here's 50. Here's 100. It's floating there, bro. Yeah.
I'm not failing. That's what matters.
Yeah. There's this other guy, Eric. Aaron Trexler.
Aaron. Never heard of him.
Aaron. No. Yeah. Well, you weren't there, but it was a good episode. Anyways. So how you get on, and we learned this, and I'm just going to reveal this. Essentially, it's not nepotism, but it is favoritism, right? If you say something nice about us, then it strokes our ego, then we welcome you on. People think it's a carefully curated, and Eric has connections with a bunch of PhDs, and he's just a very knowledgeable guy, so he knows who to bring along that would be appropriate for a topic. Nah, okay? Sam Spinelli, he said something nice about us. I said, hey, you want to be on? And he's like, yeah, okay. I'm like, what do you do? And he's like, oh, well, I'm a DPT. I said, okay, we'll make it work. And that's why we have an episode today. Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay. So that, if people wanted to peek behind the curtain, it's all about just pumping our gas or pumping I don't know what the expression is, but pumping something, Eric. I don't drive.
Pump us up.
Thank you.
It's not an intricate process to choosing guests. There's an intricately fragile ego that we have. So we need people to surround us because we're shells of human beings, really. So welcome to the podcast for the first time, Dr. Sam Spinelli,
yes, sir.
DPT. And why don't you introduce yourself to the cult, if you don't mind?
Thanks for having me on, guys. And anytime I can stroke an ego, definitely let me know. Always down. I am a physical therapist located in Western Canada, and I work with mostly barbell sport athletes. So I think it brings some comfort in this conversation, and just ready to have some fun for the next hour.
Well, I don't know if we can get you off the podcast quick enough for you to have fun in the next hour, but we can definitely have the podcast.
Yeah.
Also, Omar, you did it again. I don't know if it's intentional, but somehow he is slowly making this the Canada Takes Over podcast. Every time we have someone on, he's like, hey, I got this cool lifter.
Right.
Her name's Jessica Butner. I'm like, oh, sweet. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Here we go. Boom.
Jeffrey Nipples. I know. Hey.
Jeffrey Nipples.
It's because I want you to move it anyways. I don't want to relitigate our past. Just go on, Eric.
I have heard that Auckland is very similar to Kelowna, so you could come and live here.
Because the place I live is similar to the place on the other side of the world, I could live there? That sounds logical to me. I like it. So I will definitely head out as soon as we're post-zombie apocalypse. And I'm going to walk into the apartment that looks like mine. And if they don't let me in and if I can't live there, then I don't know. I don't know what to do. I'll just probably sleep on the streets. Back on the podcast, we have doctors Quinn Henoch and Nick Licameli. What is that at the bottom of the screen, Nick? Is that a 3 and a D in a muscle journey?
Whoa. Are you a bodybuilder?
Lovely. Yeah, it's bodybuilder.
You're welcome anytime, brother.
Let's just say I know my way around a hack squat machine.
I love it. The complex motor patterns of it'll only go one place. And Dr. Henoch, if you were to lift your lovely chest up, would we be seeing a clinical athlete shirt?
Well, you wouldn't see any muscles, I'll tell you that. But yeah, you would.
Love it. You know what? But I just get the sense, looking at you, that there might be a beautifully timed snatch or jerk that those non-muscles could produce. So
maybe.
Maybe. Oh, I've seen them. We know. You don't have to be humble. So anyway, we've got all kinds of barbell sport representatives and also people who like to look really ridiculously good, as Omar likes to say, coming from Nick. And unfortunately, if you are broken, and which is, I think, the correct terminology you guys use when someone walks into your office. Hello, nice to meet you. Person of first language. So you're a person who is broken, to be respectful, right? Yeah. You're not just broken person. That's kind of the field advancing, which I respect. But if you are a person with broken, that means you can't, unfortunately, keep lifting weights. So it's happened to me. I have been a person with broken a couple times, but now I'm a person with fixed. So I would like to talk about how do we deal with injuries in a more kind of, rubber hits the road. When someone is actually had a disastrous event, they can no longer train the way they want to, or maybe train at all. What does that look like on your end when you first get contact with one of those barbell athletes? Very broad question, obviously. But I would love to get kind of like a flowchart map of where do you start? What are the first piece of information you guys need? And then where do we go from that? Does that sound like a reasonable way of approaching this question? I got at least Omar nodding, which means nothing.
I'm just picking you up, as you know always, Eric. You demand.
Before we dive into that, before I came on the podcast, I was advised by legal counsel when I told them I was going to be on the Iron Culture podcast, just to say a few words. That's okay with everyone.
That's smart.
Smart.
So,
floor's yours.
Okay, so Dr. Nicholas Michael Licameli, DPT, Dr. DPT, DPT Doctor, do not necessarily support or agree with the views and comments of the previous Iron Culture podcast hosts, including but not limited to individuals who commit homicides in a serial fashion. Any comments about babies and bodies of water. Anything to do with promoting the idea that punching one's pancreas can cure type 1 diabetes. The mockery of any alleged sex doctors and their podcasts.
Sexy doctors, yep.
And also those with erectile dysfunction. So I just wanted to get that out there before we got into this conversation.
And I think you've probably found a similar lawyer that we found who we didn't listen to, left us, and now that client spot was given to you. You're probably doing what we should have done and actually listened to the person that we paid for legal advice. Right. The only thing I would say is that I feel quite functional. I don't know why it's called dysfunction. That last point. Things are fine for me.
You're having a great time.
Yeah, my life's fine. So I think I appreciate that disclaimer, and I think we can absolutely move on from there.
Just a quick question: Has anyone watched Eric's video from high school?
No, we're not.
Okay, no.
this will not continue, Omar.
I thought it was based off of Lord of the Rings. I thought it was called Helm's Deep, but I don't know. Yeah, Yeah, I'm not sure what it was about. I was just curious because I was considering watching it.
Good play on words.
Thank you.
Topical, as I'm in New Zealand, which is where the film was filmed. People are like, hold on, this is a panel on injury with 3 DPTs. I don't understand right now. So Does anyone want to open up with anything slightly more on topic?
I'm not sure how to follow that, to be completely honest. Few of those things are completely out of my scope, so
Right.
I feel a little bit, yeah. So training.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Barbells.
Well, Eric, when you introed that scenario, I have the broke, but now I have the fix. But when I had the broke, I couldn't lift. So then I would pose the question, could you really not lift? So to your follow-up question, what is the pertinent information that you need, or a flow chart? I'm not sure I can give you a coherent flow chart just kind of off the top, but in an analysis, kind of where they are, where they want to go, where they were, where they currently are, that type of thing. And I mean, that's really what I try to determine in the beginning, is what were you doing before? What is it that you want to get back to doing? And what is it that you want to get to, whether that was where you were or where you wanted to go before you had a setback? And then currently, where are you? And obviously in the immediate term, that's important because that's our kind of our entry point. But I'll just kind of, close all that up and let the other two chime in to say that it's very rare that the person can literally do no type of training. And I think that's probably going to be a big theme that we hear over the course of the show.
I love it. And I expected nothing less. Sam, what are your thoughts here, my man?
Yeah, I think Quinn introed this really well. And one of the first big parts, because you want the flow chart, you got to get the flow going, is to decide if there is anything of major concern that would deem anything beyond just like exercise being the appropriate management. So you're broken. Do you need to go see a real doctor, not one of us pretend ones? Do you need to have something serious looked into? And that's where, some basic levels of investigation for something like a red flag would come in. Do you have, something really scary going on, which is not the case for the majority of people.
Right.
In the majority of cases, you can probably figure out a strategy that we can discuss that can get you lifting in some capacity, and then give it time, give it a gradual exposure, and get back to what you want to do. And so yeah, once you're cleared and nothing scary is going on, then it's just about figuring out that starting point, that entry position, so we can progress you to where you want to go, like Quinn outlined. And I'll let Nick maybe give any other preferences, and then we can start hammering out some options.
Yeah, I mean, that was totally on board with both of those, and I'm just going to echo the point that it's so very important to find out where the person is, not only physically but mentally, like what they think is going on. And sometimes just that conversation can change their entire mindset, and they can leave feeling like a different person. So that's what I found a ton, especially with general population, folks or barbell sport athletes. It's finding out what they think and why they think it, and just kind of hearing them out, and and just kind of exploring some of their thoughts, and kind of figure out how we got here, and then how we're going to get to where we want to go.
That makes a lot of sense. I think we started with a little bit of amorphous fog of war, and now it's receding, and we've got the kind of what laid out was first. There may be some fear, and actually I think this is really common, and it's a holdover for, at least the perception from my end, is it's a holdover from a long history of like physical injuries, is like, hey, it's time to stop moving. We need to let the pain recede before you do anything that could make it worse. So the person may have a belief that, like, hey, got to stop training, I'm hurt. I think this is, I don't know if it still is, but I think among a lot of circles of athletes, lifters, or just people in general, especially like my parents, it's don't move and do recovery. And I think hearing that, hey, that maybe is even counterproductive or makes things worse, especially for a barbell athlete to have a detraining effect, but there's still that emotional issue. And that's kind of like you said, Sam, is the entry point, is figuring out what they can or can't do, or what they should or shouldn't do, etc., which I'm sure there's a lot of pieces that go to that. But Nick, I really like what you said, is that essentially what I'm hearing is you don't get hurt in a vacuum. There's going to be an emotive response. It reminds me of when I frantically messaged you when I had my very minor bicep tear that resolved itself within 6 weeks, and kind of had this. I had a whole story going on related to that, and what it could mean, how it affected me, whether my career was over, whether I should probably just go live on the streets and never lift again, and so. You actually did have a very big impact, just kind of talking me down off the ledge a little bit, the proverbial one. And I think that's really important, because I know when I'm afraid, I get a lot less logical. And it feels like all of a sudden there is blinders on the possibilities in front of me. There seems to be fewer options. That I think that compounds the fact that I'm not an expert in this field, So I don't know what all the options could be, and now I'm also less logical, and I'm kind of fear-based. And now there seems like there's only one or two things I could do. So simply opening that door a little wider again and having more potential options, it seems like a really important piece to that puzzle. So that's a great perspective from all of you. So Omar, you've had your entry point, which I know is very important for you. Mm-hmm. We've now addressed, okay, Omar comes in. He was previously broken, and now he thinks, oh, maybe I can do something. Maybe this isn't the end of the world. And now we're going to figure out, what does Omar need to do moving forward, or can do? So what does that process look like when we're trying to figure out, okay, what is the next step here? And I'll open that up to, we can go in the same order if we want. We can go Quinn, Sam, Nick, if we want.
I'll try to be brief, but so it depends. What does it depend on? Well, it depends on the type of training that they want to do, the type of adaptations that they were going for before. A weightlifter is going to be different than a bodybuilder, and maybe different than a field sport athlete, and so on and so forth. So what variables you manipulate. Let's take the sport out of the equation for a second and just start like brain dumping all of the things that you could potentially change in training. Obviously, the external load, the proximity to failure, so the exertion, the volume of the work, the amount of sets and reps, the speed of the movement, the range of motion, the variation. Sam and Nick are probably like, God damn it, shut up, but you have all these options. So regardless of the goal, activity, and the person, you have a lot of training variables that you manipulate all the time. Every time you write a program that you don't think about as that could be ways to manage injury and manage the pain experience, but you've got those in your back pocket. Now you choose to say, okay, well, if I wanted to maintain the adaptations that I was getting before, what would I try to keep as similar as possible, and then maybe change some other things. And if that doesn't work, okay, I can start to layer that on. So if it's a strength athlete, I want to try to keep external intensity high, but maybe I reduce the volume or reduce the range of motion, change the variation, something like that. If it's a bodybuilder, you say, okay, well, maybe I want to keep volume and proximity to failure high, but I can't tolerate high loads. So these sets are just going to suck, but I can still get some good work in if I keep it light. Chirp, chirp, enter BFR. So there's other modalities, but so the point, I'll stop there, but start thinking about all of the different variables that you manipulate when you're healthy. Those things don't go away when you're hurt. Those things can work in your favor.
Yeah, just going to chime in here real quick. One of the things that I found, so you have all these all these variables that we could modify: range of motion, intensity, volume, exercise selection, all these things. And sometimes it's a bit of a guessing game, but other times, just by listening to a bit of the history and hearing the person talk it out, it just jumps out at you like, okay, this is a range of motion type thing, or this is just a load type thing. If you ask the right questions and kind of listen, sometimes you'll get the answer. And even if you kind of do that for yourself in your own training, almost if you if your body said to you like, hey, we need to talk, like what would be the first thing you think that your body would tell you? Sometimes we know what those triggering variables are, but sometimes I guess like Eric said, when we're going through that, we have that tunnel vision, and maybe we're a bit apprehensive to test some things out and try and So yeah, sometimes I think just it is a guessing game sometimes, and you guess and test, but sometimes it will come right from that subjective report.
Sam?
I think that Nick made an excellent point there where a lot of the times if you listen to what the person's going to tell you, they give you some powerful insight into maybe one of the type of modifications you can make. Like the list that Quinn gave is fantastic, and deciding which one is a little bit tricky. Sometimes you have input from the type of athlete that they are, where they are in their training cycle, those kinds of things. Like if this is someone that's close to a meet and we need to really keep intensity high, that's obviously going to be something that you keep as a predominant variable and adjust other things. But for the majority of cases, someone might tell you what they think needs to be changed. And within reason, that's often a variable that you can consider. If this is someone that really thinks, they have anterior knee pain when they squat and that it's from having their knees go too far forward, it might be a good option to then have them adjust temporarily and then grade them back across time. Because if that person has that belief and it's a reasonable thing where, yeah, you maybe are loading that structure beyond its current capacity, and that's going to coincide with what their expectation is, then we can match the treatment as well to that if it aligns with their goals and where they currently are. So we do have this long list of options that we can easily run through and try and pick a best one. But in most cases, there's not necessarily a best one. It's just we try something at the current time, see how you adjust, how you change your symptoms, and if it's going in the correct way, we can carry on forward and then try to scale back to where you need to be. And unfortunately, there's not you have to start with intensity, you have to start with volume. There's not a perfect flow chart like that. It's just pick one, see what happens in most cases. But there are usually things that kind of guide you as to where you should go in some ways.
And it doesn't really have to be either or too. You can polarize the training. So, let's say some people, I don't know, I'm just making something up here, but if it's anterior knee pain or if it's anterior kind of pain in the crease of the hip when they squat, and they say, well, it hurts when I go really deep with heavy weights. But if I cut my depth off, I can lift heavy, or if I go light, I can go all the way down. So then you can polarize the days a little bit, and you could have one day that's light but full depth. Maybe you throw a tempo on there, throw them on a metronome to keep it closed. And then the other day, later in the week, or you flip it, whatever, later it's a pin squat or a squat to a box where you constrain the range of motion, but it allows them to load heavier. So you get that mechanical tension day or whatever it is. So you can you can polarize the training and kind of try to get both things, just not in the same training session, because that's currently not their envelope of function. They're not there yet. They don't have that capacity, as Sam said. But you can play with this stuff throughout the week, kind of like rehab undulation in a sense.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And one of the things that I've found as I've kind of gotten more and more experience is I used to try to think of all that in my head and plan out this perfect program. And then I would kind of just stop and say, well, how would you like to structure this? Like, here are options. We could do a heavier day with limited range of motion. We could do a tempo day. We can do this day. What do you think we should do? And then just kind of get their input too. And that's kind of helped me sometimes get through the weeds in my own head. If I try to, start to overthink some things, sometimes I'll just stop and say, well, here are my thoughts. Here's what we're dealing with. What do you think? How do you think we could put all these pieces together and make a program that's best for you?
One thing I wanted to add there was, earlier Nick talked about the psychosocial side of things and how the emotive aspect of being injured comes in. And for a lot of people, when we take away the idea that, or when someone is dealing with the idea that they are broken, that they can't do things, if we can find a way to make their training feel like training, where they can actually push hard, reach something that actually represents what they actually enjoy to do as a sport or activity, they can often feel progressively less like they're injured even sooner. So it might be for the case of a person that is a powerlifter, that if they have that pain in the bottom of the squat, going to that heavier box squat day might allow them to feel less broken sooner and still enjoy training to a higher degree and get their head out of being injured and start to lose the focus on how they're so injured and broken. And the same kind of thing can be taken and applied to whichever sport the person is involved in.
So then the challenging part, I guess, would be when this is our approach. We all understand what we're saying, but what happens when that person comes in and says, I have pain in the front of my hip because I'm impinging and I'm scraping the structures in front of my hip, and I have a lesion where my socket hooks over and I just feel it scraping every time I squat. I think I need to get adjusted because my hips are off and my hip flexors are tight. And, and then it's like, okay, we have way more to do here than figure out, whether it's volume or a range of motion here. And that's the most challenging for me because obviously we've all been wrong at some point, right? So we don't ever want to speak in absolutes, but it's hard not to just to throw everything at them all at once. You kind of have to ease into some things, and if they come in with a belief that something is tight, maybe you do stretch it out one day, and then you get into some of the exercise after that. One gentleman I have recently who came into me, big guy in his 40s, exercised his whole life, high school football coach, like just a big guy. And he's having some real bad like anterior hip pain in the front of his hip. And he's, been in and out of Google. He's been to a doctor who's kind of given him the same information as Google. So he came to me with the need for manual therapy for joint mobilizations, and he explained to me how his hip was scraping on itself every time he bent over. So for me, that first day was, acknowledging what he was saying, understanding what he was saying, but not necessarily agreeing, repeating it back to him just so I make sure I understand what his point is. And then I offer some other, points of view and maybe bring in, recent research is showing us that your other hip probably does the same thing. It probably scrapes and touches at some point too, but there's some reason why this hip is painful. And then we can get into that conversation of what pain is, what pain isn't, a bunch of metaphors about pain science, which I don't know if this conversation is going to go there or not, but
we don't have the time.
Seriously.
Thank God.
But this
car alarm.
Moving,
you guys know.
Car, yeah, exactly.
Chirp, car alarm.
Exercise and being able to squat, and being able to move, and this was part of his life. It's foundational to his life. He's got high school kids that look up to him on the football team. It's part of his life, and he feels like he can't even walk. He can't get up out of a chair, and so just on that first day, trying to find something that he can do. And what we ended up doing was some like TRX squats, right? So just like a gentle, like controlled range of motion down into a squat, and no pain during the session. Then we did some like hip hinging, like a RDL, just going through the motions. Felt good in the moment. Next time he came in, he said his hip hurt worse than it's ever hurt in his entire life. So then I had to reassure him, like he was obviously very upset. He's thinking this is his new normal. He can't even do a body weight squat holding onto a strap. What's happened to him? And so I explained to him, like, look, we have to find your baseline. We have to find that tolerance. We shot too high the first time. We're just going to take a step down and try something else. So then we ended up getting on the table and doing some bridges, which then were progressed to some hip thrusts with a little bit of weight on his abdomen. And then some quadruped just sit backs into like a squat. And I said, imagine you have a load on your back. Imagine you're sitting down into a squat. Go right before you think you're going to feel that pain and then come off of it and just keep kind of grooving that movement. And after that, he felt great. He said, it feels great. I could walk again. And so it's just one example, but it kind of puts into perspective some of the things that we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. And I think that explanation, we have to set that on day one. We have to make sure that they know, like, look, this isn't an exact science. We're going to try some things and it may flare up. Doesn't mean you took a step back. Doesn't mean you're getting worse. Just part of the process. And it's more feedback for us. And then, obviously things like, sleep or stress, right? So every day is different. So if you're more sore one day than the other, don't think that you did something wrong. You didn't break your hip. You didn't impinge it more and tear something. So that was, and it's still in the process with him. So that's where we're at now. So I'm excited because he's starting to buy into it now because he's starting to understand the process. So it's been really cool to watch his mindset shift a little bit. And so I can't wait to kind of progress him up higher and higher, through the steps like we're talking about here.
Fantastic. I think that's a great way of kind of illustrating some of the points you all made with specific examples. So I really appreciate that. Omar, you were going to say something earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sam took the lead and basically answered the question that I was going to have, where Nick hinted essentially, and we speak about the concept of a patient or individual, a client catastrophizing their pain, or also just altering their perception of self, and there is a partial subjective nature of pain. What role, I guess the question was going to be, is the DPT in terms of empowering their client, where it sounded like Nick as an example, and someone has this assumption they're walking in, or someone that thinks, once again, a Google Scholar, PhD, this is what I got, giving them some of the power back because they feel a loss of self, a loss of sense of self, what they're able to do, as opposed to, I'm going to prescribe you 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like, well, here's what we're thinking. How do you think about it? It's like almost by them believing in what they're going to choose, where they're taking the selection, they're already changing their perception, where they think like, this is going to help, as opposed to the person, exactly what you just said, with that older gentleman, where he's like, I don't like, he already is thinking it's a lost cause. So I guess when it comes to the role of the DPT, and maybe I'll start off with Sam, what role does empowerment play when it comes to the client or the patient, where, it's not just I'm broke physically, we're talking here spiritually. So I think as the conversation kind of evolves around the biopsychosocial model of pain, that component of the self-belief is very critical. And I thought when Nick just outlined it, it made me curious how practitioners can best use that, or the role of empowerment or enabling a client.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Omar, in that empowerment is one of the biggest aspects that we can do as clinicians. How can we get this person having greater degrees of internal locus of control, feeling like they have an ability to regulate different parts of what's going on, that they can have a powerful control moving forward and gain some self-efficacy in the process, while also learning more about possibly pain. I don't know if we need to inherently go through a deep dive of pain science with the person, but at the end of the day, at least helping them understand that pain doesn't necessarily mean something awful, that pain is a part of living, that you're going to experience it. It doesn't mean that you're broken and screwed forever, and that you can return from it. And a part of that is going to be helping this person find what they can change, what they can control, and what are these different variables that we can manipulate to get back doing the things that they care about. Whether it's going to be a hardcore bodybuilder that really wants to get back in the gym and needs to figure out their strategy, or if it's this older gentleman who just wants to be out on the football field coaching kids. Everybody can do some degree of what they want to. It's just figuring out that entry point and making a plan with them. That's one of the most important things, I think, that like the three of us do in person that might differ in some ways from a lot of traditionally, is how can we get the person involved in the process as much as possible? How can we help them figure out what they're going to do? Because it's not about what I do as a clinician. It's about how can I guide you to figure out the solutions going forward to the best degree possible. My preference would be that you don't need me, and that you see me once and never again sometimes. And so what are the steps that we can do? What are the things that you feel confident with? Where are you, where do I need to reassure you and find ways to support you moving forward? Sometimes it's, those exercises. Sometimes it's about picking an activity for you to really focus on. Maybe we're creating a graded activity plan in walking or in the gym doing different movements, and you just report back to me going forward. That's one of the things that I'll often do with my weightlifters and powerlifters, is that we create a temporary plan in place, and then they just report back every week or every few weeks, and we just adjust across time to get them back to a full training plan where they never have to talk to me again. I know I'm kind of annoying, so it's probably preferable for them to move on and get past me.
It's interesting, Sam. It's almost like if you own a grocery store, and when people come in for eggs and milk and bread, they buy them the first day, but then you say, by the way, here's a chicken to make your own eggs, here's a cow to make your own milk, and here's some grain to make your own bread, and you don't ever have to come and see me again.
So tips for grocery store owners, if you want to, make sure you don't have repeat business. If you don't want to be just like leading your customers along, having to buy eggs from you, which on a regular basis, we know that's unethical. People should be empowered to have their own eggs, milk, and grains.
No.
You know, teach a man to mill, and he eats bread for a lifetime. I think that's the saying.
Yeah, nice
So,
critique of capitalism there, Nick. Right in alignment
right.
with iron culture. Yeah.
It's not about trying to make them. Yeah.
I did not mention that in my my disclaimer. I'll be sure to add that for next time.
Yes, economic statements do not reflect my political beliefs. Awesome, I love it.
The real quick, the conversation of empowerment. It sounds cliche, but it is really the foundation of what we do, right? And for me, I've kind of gotten into telehealth about a year before the pandemic, which is just kind of luck, on my end there. But telehealth is the perfect opportunity to do that and to do what we're talking about. And I think that's why some clinicians, and Quinn, we talked about this on the Clinical Athlete podcast a little bit, but it's I think that's why a lot of people are struggling with telehealth being thrown into it, because they have this old paradigm, and you can't do that. It's you just can't. It's like using trying to put a circle into what's the circle rod into a square hole.
Yeah.
Anyway, you need the right paradigm to go about telehealth. And exactly, yeah. And yeah, I think that it's telehealth is a great opportunity to make sure that we're focusing on that stuff and giving them the tools to help themselves, because we're limited in what we can provide to them.
Well said. Quinn, any thoughts on empowerment and fitting a circle rod into a square peg hole?
Do it all the time. Echo what everybody said. We have an interesting position as physical therapists, because we don't have that direct, like let's say a surgeon, go to the extremes here. The surgeon literally has the scalpel, and it's human carpentry, and they can make these changes, these literal changes, in the moment. Before surgery, after surgery, something's different. Physical therapy is this process, or whatever it is. Rehab professionals, we're first of all, the effect sizes of our interventions are not great, and I mean, exercise is kind of lumped into that, because obviously there's responders and non-responders, and we're not running randomized controlled trials, and oftentimes our testing in the clinic isn't super reliable. So somebody might have changed their pain experience or have improved their output, but we don't actually know if it was directly the result of our overloading of stress, or if it was simply time or regression to the mean, or what we've been saying, which is basically we've decreased the fear and they're able to just let loose and try again. So it's it's a very interesting position that physical therapists are in. And we also usually don't have the time with the athlete that, say, a strength and conditioning coach or a personal trainer does, kind of that long-term relationship. Sometimes we do if that's our model, but it's this concept of informed consent that I think is almost lost. Like when you go to an urgent care, you go to the doctor's office, you just sign the informed consent. You don't even read it. You just say, yeah, you put your signature there. But informed consent is what we're talking about, is essentially giving them the choice. So sure, we're the healthcare professional and they're coming for our quote unquote expertise. But what we do is we provide our recommendations based on what we think is going to maximize the probability of them getting to their goals. And ultimately it's their choice. And so we present the choices, and we're here to help. And if they have beliefs that are in direct opposition to what we feel is the best choice, we address that. But I think informed consent is a really powerful concept that we do, but it's something that I explicitly state that we're doing. Like, this is I'm going to give you the choices. Choice number one is you don't have to change a thing and you can just leave. You choose not to do anything, and we play the wait and see game, and that's a choice. Sometimes that's the best call. If you hurt your back yesterday, you've never had a back injury, and it's just kind of like a little mild, that may be the game that we play. If this is a 10-year problem, or it's something that the literature, like patellofemoral pain, this nebulous diagnosis, however the recent position statement says that this may not change if you don't do something. It's one of those non-specific diagnoses, but it's still there. And the wait and see game doesn't seem to help as much as some other stuff. So then that's the conversation that you have. We can play this wait and see game, but based on my interpretation of the literature on this topic, that may not get you as far. And so here are our other options. And so just echoing, what everybody says, but take that seriously as a healthcare professional. It's not just a piece of paper that they sign. It's a process. Informed consent is a dialogue.
I love it. And there's a couple key points. I'll give the serious one first. And that is that I think most people, like you said, informed consent is a tick box to not get sued or get a malpractice issue. It's that you're supposed to do. And you're presenting it as this is an opportunity for buy-in, collaboration, and empowerment. Because that was your response to this question, Quinn, which I love, because informed consent ensures that the person is involved, that they understand what's happening, that they agree with it, and that you're therefore moving forward in partnership. However, I don't know, based on everything else you said, if they would ever walk into your office, given your techniques are unreliable, the effect sizes are small, similar to the placebo or regression to the mean, and I expect all three of you to probably quit and maybe work at a new age grocery store that gives people chickens and grain millets moving forward. So that's a really interesting point, though, in all seriousness, though, how informed consent is not just, I got to do this so I don't, deal with litigious threats,
So on that note, well, first of all, you just described my existential crisis that I'll have every now and then on our profession. But I'll actually have them sign the informed consent. I'll do the routine deal where they sign something in the beginning, but I basically have them sign the same exact form after we talk about everything. It's almost like a proverbial, this is our plan, right? And you're signing off on this plan. And it's just almost another layer to come back to, 3.5 weeks later, when maybe they've had a setback or they've forgotten all the stuff they agreed to and they were on board with, and now they're kind of in the process, and it sucks and it's boring, and it's like, now you come back to this agreement that we talked about and you can just kind of rehash it, but yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
That's one of the things I've actually learned from you, Quinn, early on, was what happens when you get those times, and after you've explained something once, twice, 3 times, and they're still complaining or about the same things, or still voicing the same concerns. What do you do? And you just say it like the first time, and you hear them out, hear their concerns, and say it like it's the first time again. Hopefully, it will eventually stick.
The good thing about covering it as soon as possible, like on day one, is that you do have the ability to ask them. Now, you remember we talked about, like, you start pulling it out of them.
Yep.
And then a lot of times it's awesome when somebody comes back and they're as frustrated as they've been in these other experiences, but they say, and I know I just need to do X, Y, Z. And that's when you're like, all right, it's like, it's starting to stick a little bit, but you get into trouble when you don't have those conversations about expectations in the beginning, because then you don't have anything to fall back on. Mm-hmm. And now you're trying to set expectations in the midst of the process, maybe when they're more frustrated than before because they've been investing some time into this. And then now you're telling me this is going to be up and down process and I don't have a time. Like, it's harder to do.
Yep.
Totally makes sense. One thing, Omar, I think we've got a pretty cool breadth of barbell experience here. Mm-hmm. Quinn works with weightlifters. Sam, you mentioned you work with weightlifters and powerlifters. Nick, you work with bodybuilders with 3DMJ. I've competed in across the range. Probably identify most with some more than others. Omar, you're more of a strength lifter, as you say, which I love. I don't know about you, Omar, but I feel like, depending on which kind of silo you're in. And earlier, Quinn said, let's take the sport out of the equation. I'm bringing the sport back in because I think
too bad
the sport. Yeah, no, it's staying in. You don't get to just change equations without consulting with us, Quinn. I think the reason why I want to bring that back in is because I think depending on the silo you're in, it will influence the options you think you have for what can be modified. kind of going back to some of the variables that you listed, Quinn, and some of the tools you guys all talked about, I know that range of motion, load, volume, and rep range are all perceived very differently, whether or not you're a weightlifter, bodybuilder, powerlifter. You can say the same thing to someone, and it may mean something very different. So I don't know, Omar, I would love to get your thoughts on, like, if you have an injury, what are some of the first things you think about modifying? What's kind of your go-to or your bias that might help us get some insight into what we might not consider?
So first, Eric, thank you. I'm going to have to give a Middle Earth analogy because I just have to. And my short answer is going to be I stole that shit from Sam Spinelli from The Strength Therapist, where he had a fantastic post. And a shout out to Sam and everyone contributing here, Nick, Quinn, where I think it's really hard to condense some of this information where there's so much it depends into a way that you don't lose the fidelity. But I think the three of you do a very good job of that, especially in a place where you're trying to get out of their exposure or trying to be noticed. And so you're trying to keep the fidelity high, the information correct, and then also appeal to a wide audience, because there is in some segments a little bit of that snobbishness, you know, what I'm saying, that occurs a little bit. It's like, no, well, I can't simplify it. It's like, look, if Brian Green can simplify tachyon transmissions, I'm pretty sure pain science can be simplified. You know, it's like, it's not quantum entanglement, folks. I'm just saying, you know, there's that Einstein quote, if you can't explain it simply, then you can't explain it. I'm like, ugh. So I think, you know, trying to decrease the knowledge asymmetry is very important. So I want to give a shout out, because I will circle back to that in my answer to Sam and some of the approaches, Eric. But I have to say, brother, that we are lifers. Like, you and I, we're screwed. And you basically pointed it out. Like, we're part of the segment, essentially, that I would say wouldn't typically consult a DPT first, historically. And what I mean is, you needed, Eric, just before I go on quickly, is it FAI surgery you needed for the hip?
I did. I got a bilateral labral repair and some bone spur shaven. Yeah, and I got that immediate change from the surgeon.
Right.
I went in squatting like a 65-year-old, and I came out squatting like I was 29 again.
Whew.
To be clear, I got the surgery in my early 30s, so
for the age, comparison.
Yeah.
Eric, just quickly before, and then just before I go on, did you ever try walking it off, like that whole before the surgery? Like, I know you consider the surgery, it sounds like it did all right or whatever, but like, you try walking it off?
First got the first got the consultation in 2013. I got X-ray and MRI with dye and Faber test and all that good stuff, and I'd been in pain for a while. Mm-hmm. Got the surgery in 2017. So I not only did I try walking it off, I actually tried squatting it off, deadlifting, lunging, partial squatting, power snatching, and eventually I just saw my numbers kind of just slowly slide towards I'm lifting less and it hurts more, and I went, maybe I should do something. And apparently it actually was a good idea. It seemed to work. But I walked it off for about 4 years. Yeah. Until I couldn't walk.
And so I say,
metaphor.
I bring that up because I think it almost extends for us. There's a certain segment of the lifting population that the mindset is that I'll work it off, or I'll walk it off, or it's okay. And I think myself and Eric historically because we just love the iron game, we don't want to change anything. We want to be pursuing PRs. And so I'm using the analogy now of we're both simultaneously a Isildur at Mount Doom. Elrond is there saying, I saw my father Elendil die, Gil-galad with his spear die in front of Sauron. I cut the ring off of his finger. I have it. You could get the surgery. We're both now the same person, Eric. The ring is the surgery, or the ring is some sort of measurement taken, and we're thinking about it. And Elrond's like, cast it into the fire at Mount Doom, and we just think for some reason the lure of the ring, like the PR, no, and we just put it in our pocket. Eventually, we get arrows in our back. We die. The Dunedain of the North. That's what's up. So I think it is a underrepresented, I should say, segment of the population. Not that we're shut up in lifters, but a portion of the population, if let's say DPTs expect maybe a slightly more neurotic clientele, because you walk in, you want something fixed. And then there's that portion of people that think, nah, it's going to be fine. Like, this is a non-issue. And so I think that extends beyond one category. I do think the old guard, if I had to say something, of probably powerlifting would be my assumption, is part of that. Some of the old guard of bodybuilding, would be part of that. I think the new kind of like IPF boys and girls, a little bit more sensible because they want to achieve those PRs and like, this isn't right. But to answer the question very briefly, and before opening up to our excellent guests, who are all, Sam, I'm going to say it, they're all invited to Canada because you're all too damn nice. Okay, we in Canada we could do that. We just base it upon a personality test, and you're all gracious enough, nice enough, like you're in, right? Sam, do you agree?
Friendly, if you're gonna, yeah. If your first instinct is to apologize when you bump into somebody, you're welcome.
Yeah, no, they're in. So I no joke for myself after making all those many mistakes. One of the best kind of heuristics going down where we talk about the flow chart, I saw actually on Sam's Instagram. So I'm gonna let Sam take it over rather than just copy exactly what he would say from a more qualified position about the various ways that you could change if you're a strength lifter or you're someone that cares about it. So like I care about the squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, as opposed to just like, oh, use a little less weight. I believe there's 4 or 5 in the post, Sam, that you outlined about the tempo, the range of motion, exercise variation, all those things. So I'll let you take over and then open it up as opposed to just, once again, copy your homework.
All right. Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is that Quinn outlined a lot of these earlier, but from a standpoint of people that want to stick to the program as much as possible, they want to feel like they're training still, we have a few different options. Yeah, load is something that we can manipulate, but I think when I'm looking at it, I usually will manipulate load more as a characteristic of necessity than as the primary objective. So load will decrease because I'm making modifications to the movements that require the load to decrease, while effort is still being maintained relatively similar as much as possible. So, if you were doing full range back squats and you're experiencing pain somewhere, and the first thing that we're going to try is to, maybe introduce a tempo modification, and you were at RPE 8 before, well, we're going to still stick to a relatively RPE 8 if we can, but now we're going to introduce maybe a 3-second down, 3-second up, and make you really regret your choice in wanting to work on this through that format. And then trying to do the same sort of adjustment wherever we can. There's going to be limitations in some of these options. Like, for instance, I can't really implement a tempo progression in something like a snatch or a clean very well. It's going to be a really ugly and awkward thing and not be a fun experience. But we maybe could be, if you are experiencing lower back pain and we're just trying to find a solution around it temporarily, as we just take a little bit of stress off of it, we could maybe go to something like a block clean or block snatch and stick as many variables as possible to the same program that we were implementing previously, and just have you return back the plan and then, scale back as we can. Like tempo is a great option. We can definitely modify intensity and effort if we need to, but as much as possible, I really like to have people train challenging, feel like they're in the gym. If this is someone who's like a general population individual and not a barbell sport athlete or strength athlete, it's a different thing where they don't really care about the effort and the desire of like feeling it. But if you identify as like a person who's like goes to the gym because it's your jam and it's all you want to do and you think about it all day long, like you're not going there to do nice casual RPE sets of 4. Like you want to get in there and get after it in some way. And if that means that we start off with the back squat, you can't do that. We go to a front squat, can't do that. Go to a box squat and keep going down our path all the way down to like a split squat if we have to. And that's the necessary deviations we have to make. But if we can, have you feel like you're training hard and you do that for a few weeks and then gradually go through that progression in reverse, then most people are pretty happy about it.
Nice. One of the things that just made me think of, and that's, you hit it out of the park there. That was awesome. And I think it goes back to the point we were saying before, how it's so important to have outline not the exact plan, but sort of the idea of the plan on day one, so that one of the things I do often is I imagine the person in front of me going home, sitting around the dinner table and explaining to their family, so how did physical therapy go? What is that person going to say to their family, right? So what I want to make sure that, especially a barbell athlete, knows is that, look, we're doing quadruped rocking right now, or look, we're doing box squats right now. It's not because the squat is bad for your knees. It's just temporary, that we're just going to hang around here with the box squat for a little bit. We're going to let your body kind of get used to that. We're going to desensitize that system with that box squat. And then we're going to get rid of the box and start progressing upward to your tolerance. Maybe we do 1 set without the box and 3 sets with the box. And then maybe we do 2 sets with the box. And this way they know when they leave on that first day, okay, I'm not going to be box squatting for the rest of my life. Like, this is only temporary until we build up that capacity to progress. So I like to make sure that they know that, look, this is only what we're doing now. I'm not saying that we're never going to get back there. This is just a small modification we're doing now, and then we're going to build back up.
Quinn, I'd love to get your thoughts. I think this is cool. I love what you guys are saying, because I know, Nick, some of the things I was most impressed with when you were working with Andrea, and some of the things I've seen you do, is just that the creativity that comes out of the experience that you guys have and trying to find ways. And I know it's all emergent from unique person comes in with a unique issue, and I tried X, Y, and Z, and then I realized there's a whole alphabet. Those are only 3 letters, and oh crap, there's all kinds of stuff I could do. So Quinn, I'd love to know, like, when a weightlifter comes to you, they are like Sam mentioned, athletes typically want to work hard. They're probably, at least this is my bias, if I was to go to a physical therapist, when I'm actually at the point where I'm stepping into an office and I have an injury, I'm already trying to work around it to some degree, but I've exhausted the limits of my creativity, patience, or I'm worried that what I'm doing is quote unquote wrong and maybe making it worse or not facilitating repair. So when you're working with weightlifters, what is typically what they think's on the table versus what are they missing? Like the things that they might modify versus what you actually could modify that they might not have thought before they came to you.
That's one awesome thing about the sport of weightlifting is there's so many variants and there's so many subtle ways to tweak the movements where it doesn't completely remove the skill acquisition element, and it maintains a lot of the specific force vectors and energy transfers and the velocities and some of the timing aspects of the movements that you can still keep in there. So Sam mentioned, let's say it's you get a lot of like tendon sensitivities. Let's say it's anterior knee pain, some type of patellar tendinopathy like symptoms when they squat or when they pull from the floor, let's say in the snatch starting position, because it's a slightly deeper position. So it's kind of like that pseudo squat position. And also when they catch, when their feet aggressively impact the floor again, that jolt, that quick impulse of force, that lights them up. So I'll dig into this. We'll call them triggers, whatever word you want. When do you feel your thing? During what movements do you feel your thing? Okay, it was the lifts, back squats, snatches, sometimes jerk, something like that. Say, okay. Then you start digging into kind of the subsets, which is basically what we're talking about. Does it hurt when it's just heavy? What if you were going to do a half squat? What if you were going to go really slow? So I start asking them these questions. And so they start giving me, like we've already talked about, they start feeding you the information as to what element of the specific movement patterns are the problem. Obviously, we're playing the reductionist game here, but it's called entry point for a reason. I mean, you got to start somewhere, So if it's a power, let's say pain with anterior knee with full snatching from the floor when they catch, say, okay, we can go from the blocks. So that takes out the deep knee flexion position at the start. We can do the power variations where you deliberately catch it higher than a full squat. And we can modify or modulate your foot movement. Typically, commonly in weightlifting called a no, quote unquote, no foot snatch, where you essentially maintain the same footprint. Your feet kind of start and stay in the receiving position. So you're not taking as much of that impact when your feet land because they barely leave the ground, if at all. And so those 3 things now we're doing snatches, but it's the same timing, wherever the level of the block pull is, it's the same pull. You're still pulling under, you're still moving quickly, you're still receiving the bar in the same way that you would for a full snatch. It's just this constraints-led approach where you're now modifying the task within their current bandwidth or within their current envelope of function, with the expectation that over time, you stop poking the bear just enough so that things calm down, and now you can get a favorable adaptation, that graded exposure effect, rather than further sensitization or symptomology. And then the other thing which we haven't really talked about is tissue-specific loading, where exercises fall into a bucket of specifically designed to stress the tissues that are sensitive and are not really designed to be coordinative or to be specific to your goal movement pattern. So in this example, could be an isometric leg extension hold or an isometric leg extension push, where my goal for that exercise is literally to direct load exactly where I want it, which is that knee extensor mechanism, so that they can't shift off of it. We're not teaching, that's not going to transfer to the coordinative aspect of the snatch, but it might transfer to their ability to tolerate more load through that structure. So those are things that we haven't really talked about, where we've taken this top-down approach, which I think is bang for buck, the way to go. But when you clean that stuff up, you can start to layer some of these other things on that can maybe be the sand that fills in the gaps between the big rocks. I don't know if that answers your question, your original question, Eric, but I'll stop there. And
well, I think it gives some really cool insight into the options you have, and it also opens up almost this philosophical paradigm of movements versus muscles, which is something that I think we've seen over the years and kind of the language we use around problems. Bodybuilders are the ones who will often approach pain and injury from this direction. It's like, oh, this muscle group hurts, because that's the kind of the whole way they think. And they try to work around training that muscle. When it actually may be, if they had a different perspective, they could train the muscle with a different movement. Like instead of, like if lat pull downs hurt, you could do an isolated adduction or just shoulder extension with straight arms. I've been in points in my career when I've had to do that. So I think it's really interesting. And one of the things when I talk to young trainers, people who aren't DPTs, when they're thinking about injury and they're trying to kind of armchair diagnose what's going on, which don't do that, you're not a health professional, is that you're much less likely to make an error if you're talking about movements rather than muscles or structures or tissues or individual aspects of our anatomy. Like if this movement does hurt, that movement hurts. If a modification to it doesn't, great. And that's all you have to figure out. But when you start coming in like Dr. Google, like Nick said, oh, it hurts when I do this movement because of my labrum is getting caught by X, Y, and Z, and this is probably due to synergist dominance, and my hamstrings are working harder than my glutes, and I think my medial glutes aren't turning on, and my VMO is probably involved. You've just layered like 15 things, and at any single point you could be wrong and addressing something either making it worse. But it's really interesting to me, what you said, Quinn, is that, if you are able to say, I think this is the problem, that you could use a non-specific movement to get a tissue-specific adaptation. Because as humans, we move. We don't think about, okay, time to flex my hip and then extend my foot as I climb this tree, while I then flex my shoulder and grip with my forearm extensors. That's not the way we think. We think climb the tree. So if climbing the tree, quote unquote, results in pain in a certain area, the natural thing, the thing we can expect, is a compensation, so that we climb the tree in a slightly different way that doesn't hurt. And that almost happens automatically. And I use almost, probably should say, it happens automatically. So the downside to using a movement-based focus is if someone is able to compensate, sure, that tissue that's having pain is going to get unloaded, but maybe we actually want to load it as part of the rehab plan. So I think that's just a really interesting perspective that you brought up. I didn't think that was something that we were going to talk about today, but I think it is it's kind of an interesting take that, hey, it doesn't mean that's off the table. Doesn't mean it's always about movement. And obviously things do come down to tissue when there is actually, tissue stress, and that could be a part of the equation. So that's not a question to anybody. That's just kind of something I felt was interesting to bring up. And I'll just open the floor to anyone else who wants to say things that are more informed.
Yeah, one of the things that just made me think of was the idea of principles that are set in stone, pretty much consistent throughout any situation, and then there are like tactics or like whatever word you want to use, but it's kind of like if you're building something, our principles are, if I turn that screw to the right, it's going to go in. If I turn it to the left, it's going to come out. No matter how I go about building whatever I'm building, that is always going to be consistent, right? So that's kind of like the envelope of function, like Quinn is talking about, which is we have this capacity that one way or another, we're going to try to build that capacity back up. And for one reason or another, it got decreased somehow, and we're going to try to build that back up. But then there are a bunch of different ways, and that's where I guess some of the nuance comes in, and we can go about it different ways. But those principles, I think, are what are lost sometimes, and they're pretty much consistent, throughout. And Eric, another thing you made me think of when you were talking about when you climb the tree and you're thinking about every muscle that's working. Unfortunately, I can say for me personally, I was that guy coming out of physical therapy school. Every time I took a step, I would imagine what my foot, if it was pronating, if my knee was rotating in, if my tibias were rotated the wrong way. And every time I would get onto the barbell, I would be thinking about, different movements of my hip or my feet. And I'd have like a 20-minute foam rolling warm up, every muscle that you could think of. And I think that is kind of why, clinical athlete kind of brought us all together in a way, right? And it's that place to come and learn. And I think that was a pivotal moment in my career when that mindset shifted. And I think that's why we all exist. We all exist to try to help push that, because I think we know what it's like to be that guy. We know what it's like to overanalyze every movement that we do, and it's not fun. It's stressful. You're thinking about so much, and there's only so much that you can handle and impact, and you're not seeing results, and so I think that was an interesting point, that some of our patients or clients are that person, but that's how we're trained, at the moment. And, and no fault to our physical therapy programs, they do what they have to do. But I think that's an interesting parallel there. That's kind of how we're trained. So I wonder why the public, so to speak, maybe has that mindset. Is it because we're giving it, or is it because they're getting it from somewhere and we're reinforcing it? I'm not, it's just kind of some thoughts that are going through my head right now.
This makes me think about the era I was in with my nutrition and academic knowledge of worrying about the glycemic index of my carbohydrates in the post-workout window with an appropriate insulin response. That era of the overly mechanistic, reductionist focused kind of bodybuilding nutrition or science sounds like it's paralleled by making sure that you have eccentric transverse retroversion of the tibial femoral shank into the frontal plane. That means nothing, by the way. Probably means an injury, what I just described. That's kind of that's the kind of the background that maybe the equivalent, the parallel in the physical therapy world. I'd never thought of it before. That's actually really interesting.
100%. And I'm into bodybuilding and physical therapy are two very important things in my life. And 3DMJ and clinical athlete all on one screen. I can honestly say I was both of those guys, and now I have become different and enlightened because of everyone on this screen. So I appreciate it. Slipped in that little.
You want to raise, folks.
Hey, Eric, he did something even more profound, I must say. What Nick did, really and truly, he restored Quinn's faith in himself, because he just said, like, clinical athlete brought me to this point, and Quinn said, I question, so that's my existential crisis. This is like a Rashomon moment where his faith in humanity has been restored. It's very pivotal, poignant, beautiful. So just to come full circle like that, Quinn, how are you feeling right now?
Little fulfilled, like what?
Back, Nick. I appreciate you. Man.
You were on the edge. It's like, as a client or patient's on the edge, you were on the edge. Like, should I even do this?
Like what you guys are describing, I just see it's like the pendulum swings, right? And the pendulum not only swings in the field as far as ideas, but it also swings in your own head. And what is it? It was Bruce Lee's Shahari, or Shuhari, where in the discipline of Shu, you're just learning, and a kick is just a kick and a punch is just a punch. But when you're Ha, holy shit, a kick is way more than a kick and a punch is way more than a punch. But then when you progress past that, the Ri, you're back to, a kick is a kick and a punch is a punch. And you have this more, just a kind of a more simplistic understanding, because you have a better understanding. And that's going back to what you guys said. So for me, it was like when I just gave the example of leg extensions, and that's just an example that I give because it's easy to conceptualize. But I went through the pendulum swings of leg extensions for bodybuilding when I was like 15, and then going through training and physical therapy where leg extensions were non-representative and non-functional and bad, put undue stress on the knee, and so leg extension bad. And now I'm back to, you know what? If I'm trying to apply force to a specific area, and that area happens to be the knee extensor mechanism, well, leg extension is a pretty good fucking option. And in fact, there's some evidence to back that up in regards to ACL land, at least, and tendon adaptation. So I see that happen just in general. It's these dichotomies that we make, or it's now we're movement oriented. It's all about just the movement, you know, and then within that, it doesn't even matter how they move anymore. So if we bring that back and say, well, you know, biomechanics, it still affects the output. And if we're saying certain patterns and certain ways of distributing forces can contribute to the pain experience, and then if we change those patterns and alter those force distributions, the pain experience is also altered, well, then biomechanics matter right then and there as an example. And then within that, we can still back to layer on these what seemingly are non-representative, non-functional tasks, but seen through a different lens, they provide function by providing mechanical stress and adaptation to the area that will then transfer to the activity. So it's all about how you look at it. But I think you can do a lot of stuff if we're bringing it back to the nature of the conversation. When you're injured, you've got a lot more options than you think. And the program that you were on when you got hurt was probably not the program that you were going to be on in 3 months anyway. So, you know, shit changes. And injury and pain are just another constraint that we manage. And sometimes it allows you to pull back and work on some other stuff.
Sam, I saw you nodding your head. Any thoughts, my man?
Yeah, no, I think Quinn nailed it. I think for anyone who is going through that realm of transitioning through physical therapy school, having some experience in strength and conditioning, they go through that trend of where you just perceive these more isolated type movements as being not as relevant, not as beneficial, and you start to emphasize these other movements to a greater degree. And a lot of the stuff that we outlined today is very much focused on those other options where, you know, you modify the movements to the best degree possible to allow you to keep training. And for most people, that's going to be one of the best options that you can take initially, at least, because it's going to allow you to keep training to a higher degree, keep relative specificity, and have you keep doing the things that are most meaningful to you. But then it does layer on this other aspect of where you could add in these other options that might be really beneficial, but that don't replicate or look like the task, at least through most people's lens, as obviously. So like Quinn mentioned, the knee extension, or these other options that we might look to implement to target specific tissues that we do have evidence that could be beneficial in certain pathological cases. The challenge that comes with that is that a lot of the times selecting those things is a lot more nuanced and a lot more by a specific pathological situation, not so much like I have a little bit of sensitivity with a certain movement. And like if you have some discomfort with knee on the front side of your knee, you don't necessarily need to start doing leg extensions. You know, whereas like you might benefit from adding them in these certain cases that are representative possibly by having anterior knee pain, but you don't have to rush to that initially. So for a lot of people, if you can just modify the movement and go down that path and that's all you need to do, that's an excellent option before we have to start jumping into adding a bunch of new stuff to your training. For some situations, it might be deemed appropriate, but that's like getting down a whole deep rabbit hole of deciding those things. And for most people, they don't have to do that.
One of the things about the pendulum swing, and is for me anyway, one example would be something like foam rolling. So it went from one extreme where I felt like we had to foam roll everything, and then went to another extreme where there's no use for foam rolling ever. But now I'm kind of somewhere where if it comes with the correct narrative and we're not explaining to people that it's breaking up tissue or changing anything, and it's just like this short-term thing that's happening to help kind of reduce that pain response a bit. It's no different than changing foot position on a squat or changing range of motion. If someone can roll their mid back and hear a couple pops and cracks and feel good in 10 seconds, and that helps them squat deeper, I'll do it every time, as long as they understand that what's happening, what's not happening. So I think it goes back to that pendulum swing where we have to, not that we are all standing here saying that we were lost and now we're found and now we have all the answers. It's more like we were lost, we were found, and now we're more lost than ever. So we're going to keep an open mind because if our past taught us anything, it's that we don't know everything. We're learning every day. So I think that's probably the main thing that I've picked up is not this paradigm of graded exposure and all that. That yes, that's important, but it's more how we got to that, and it's that mindset that I think is going to make us more resilient as a profession and as thinkers and as learners moving forward.
If we just kind of silo this down to the common injuries that we see, more common injuries that we see in the clinic, just the niggles that they're not snap, crackle, pop. I just got surgery and now I need that type of intensive rehab. They're like the stuff, anterior knee pain, these low back pain, not anterior hip pain, shoulder, whatever, stuff that kind of affects training or at least affects, you don't know what's going on, that type of thing. So the concept, I think, that we've talked about a lot, this concept of opportunity cost. So a lot of people, when they're injured, so now they can't train as hard or as much already, just because of the pain experience is that constraint that's limiting their ability to do so. But then they take even more of that time away and put it to other means that maybe they think will help, like Nick mentioned foam rolling as one example, or whatever modality that you want to insert. But there's opportunity costs when you choose to do something, you're then choosing not to do something else. And the something else is sometimes the thing that you should keep doing, but what they don't know is how to do it or if they should do it. And I think this whole show is kind of what we talked about. But if you're an athlete who's just kind of like, okay, now this makes sense, I can manipulate variables just like I do when I write programs or write my own program or when coach writes me a program, what type of opportunity cost am I looking at if I choose A versus B, B versus C? If I choose a 60-minute massage session instead of training that day, or instead of doing a modification, because that training session is not as fun when I modify it, so I'll just go get a massage and hopefully that helps me recover. It's Thursday, hopefully that massage helps me recover for tomorrow's heavy squat session. And as you start thinking about things like that, I think it'll help to frame a more realistic expectation in these whole thing. So it's just another concept I wanted to throw out, this concept of opportunity cost, and foam rolling is a good example of that, where people will pull away from their training to do these adjunct things that aren't providing much, and then that's a conversation piece that you can have. Whereas rehab just may not be as fun. I mean, that just may be the reality of it when we have to modify these things. We've talked about how we can kind of keep it real, keep it fast, or keep it heavy to some extent, but it's still not the exact same. And there's, to some extent, there has to be some acceptance of that period. And all training, like regular training, isn't all that fun either, So I think people can kind of relate to that.
We were all with you, Quinn, up until that moment.
Then I just disagree with you guys.
Are we still in iron culture?
Yeah, so this is the Iron Culture podcast where everyone loves training more than their family. So carry on, Quinn.
I mean, I would argue that if you enjoy training every single day, then you don't train hard enough.
Woo! Shots. Boo boo! Oh,
okay, so Quinn was having an existential crisis. Now I'm having an existential crisis. And I'm thinking, should I train less so that I love training more?
Yeah, you'll always just feel great, and you'll be like a little weak and just like not super strong, but you'll like feel good because you didn't really push the boundaries all that hard. you're like always leaving a bunch in the tank. Like, yeah, I mean, that's a great place to be.
Whoa.
RPE 10 or death.
Yeah. I'm going to start training once a year. And that's what I took from that. No, now we're getting off track. But you made some really good points. Keep going, Quinn.
Yeah.
Oh, I was done. I mean, I don't.
good.
Yeah.
Leading off of that, though, I think that's an important conversation. The last piece that you just had there, Quinn, where you said about the idea that someone has to get comfortable with that period where they're not training as they want. But I do want to enter a dark conversation now, which is the ex-athlete, like the potential possibility of someone maybe never returning to the level that they wanted. And what I mean when I say that is that I know of, some high-level athletes. So now there's different categories of people, right? And so if there's someone that, once again, is just learning to lift, they're learning the deadlift, and like, my back. It's like, okay, don't catastrophize this. Like, it's too play. Like, probably like, you're good to go. Don't worry about it. There's a lot of room to grow. All gravy. They're fine. They're back on their path. But there is a certain contingent probably listening right now, and we have shout out to our boy Mike Teixeira. Not saying this is him, but there's some high-level lifters. There's a lot of people stronger than myself and Eric, and we hate all of them. But they listen, and every single one of them with venom. But they are at the point where, they're Wilks, it's above 500, okay? They're lifting some heavy weight. And to be at that level of competitiveness might have a cost, or they might have some of these nagging issues. And actually, it was what made me think about this several years ago, maybe 2 years ago. Barbell Medicine, they had a great article. Someone wrote an article, their experience. And I would say barbell medicine is on the, not catastrophizing, empowerment side of kind of pain science and rehab and all those portions. And I think it was something titled My Experience with Non-Specific Lower Back Pain, okay? And I was reading this because, I was going through nothing major, but I was like, let me read some motivational stuff, basically. Like, here you go. Like, I'm just going to get back at it. And essentially what it was her coming to terms with the fact that it might flare up. She used to lift X amount of weight, and now she's lifting Y amount of weight, and Y is lower than X. And the variations that she does are actually not just pulling from the floor. So I thought I was going to get this narrative from this place where it's like, man, this is what I want to hear. Like, I always want to hear basically like, don't worry about it, champ. Like, you got another shot, Like, you missed the Death Star run. You got one more shot. Pipe down the hole. Cool. But when I read this, it was the horror realization, like maybe it doesn't always come out, but maybe it's time for a change. And I'm wondering if you guys have experienced that with an athlete, not telling them directly, like, dog, your days of being a hyper-competitive Olympic weightlifter, it's over. But, how do you have that conversation? Does it even occur? How do you facilitate it? What does it look like? Because I think we can all agree that there might be that conversation for someone on that high end. So again, we're not talking about the general population, like, I slipped and I fell and like, ouchie, or this person that, once again, that might be neurotic and comes in and it's their elbow. It's this person, once again, competing at a high level, trying everything, and maybe it's not working. You're working with them and they want to be at the best level, but that might not be realistic. I just want to open the floor to what that conversation looks like, or what are the potential pathways for that. And that's kind of like, not the kernel of what I think you were saying, Quinn, but the idea of, you might have to adjust. It's like, what if you have to permanently adjust? So I don't know who wants to take this. Just want to open the floor.
So I think an aspect is that for every individual in every sport, there will come a time where you inherently do have to step back, and you can't have the same level of performance, and things will degrade. And while it sounds wonderful that I could continuously make improvements for the rest of my life, and I will be the best I am 40 years from now, it's just unrealistic. And that, unfortunately, an injury may be one of the factors that coincides with the time where someone then starts to have a downward motion of their outcome performance. And that can be really challenging. And sometimes, you're the person that's involved in that conversation because you're the one managing their injury. I've never had to tell an athlete that they're never going to perform at that level, but, being a part of the idea that you took this long to get to such a high level of performance, now we have to go back to a certain level and then work your way up again. Some athletes don't want to go through that, and some have a lower performance. At least from my experience, I haven't worked with a ton of people that are at that level in weightlifting or powerlifting, but in other sports, I've worked with a lot of people that have been at the Olympics for swimming and for hockey and these other sports where once they experience that injury, they just want to leave the sport and they want to go do something else. Like they have no interest in coming and playing or competing at a lower level. Like if I can't be the best in it, I will just do something else because I don't have that interest anymore. And that might be the situation. And like a case like Mike Teixeira, like he's progressing back, and it's taking a long time. And he'll probably not be at the same level as he was in like the 2009 World Games, but he will likely still be a very strong individual that can compete at a relatively high level for his respective age group and those factors. And that's the thing that I think a lot of individuals could do. It just really comes down to like how long are you willing to wait and find out if you can make those modifications to return back to it. Like how passionately do you care about competing in that sport at that level? Sometimes it's just that I want to compete in general, or it's that I want to perform the sport to a degree. It might not be that you have to be a super high level athlete. And that's where like that case of the other person that you mentioned on the barbell medicine blog was that she just had to make modifications to be able to keep going.
Right. Quinn?
So I'll try to answer the question, or at least just throw a case out there.
Yeah.
It's first of all, it's hard. And I think the conversation, again, because we're not in the position usually where it's like life or death, it's usually not, if you don't take this treatment, you will die, or it's potentially you are at risk of this thing happening again. If we're talking about a quick return from surgery or repeated structural failures, and that's a kind of a case that I'll go into now. But when it's a conversation that's not that, but it's maybe more of what the blog that you were talking about, Omar, where it's just kind of the athlete just starts to come to the realization too, but you're still kind of working as a team, and over time you're having these small conversations, and the expectations just kind of converge, and it's almost like things just drop a level, even if it's not explicitly stated. You're both just on the same page that like, this is just kind of where we're here now, and we're shooting for these things now, and it's not the same as it used to be. And I can't say that there's always this distinct inflection point where that happens. But so now back to this case where there was distinct inflection points. So at the world championships, high level weightlifter, world team member, dislocated his shoulder in a snatch, during the snatch. So on the big stage in front of a lot of people, just caught it a little bit too far behind, tried to save it. It's 170 kilos in the bottom of a snatch. So anterior dislocation, relocated when he fell down. I thought it was his elbow, but it was his shoulder. So we were like, cool, it's not his elbow. Shoulder's better. We're going to have a catch. I'll take the shoulder over the elbow. But so he had a history of shoulder dislocation that he didn't get imaging. It relocated, and he returned to his prior form and beyond. He was snatching 170 on the world stage. We took a conservative approach again and dislocated 2 more times in training in the next, I can't remember the timeline, it was 3 years ago, but I want to say in the following 6 months, he dislocated 2 more times, taking a very conservative approach back to lifting. Dislocated 2 more times, got more imaging. The conversation was, if you want any probability of getting back to your prior level, it's likely you're going to need a reconstruction of this shoulder. It's highly likely that you're going to dislocate again. It's happened 3 times under not hard training, just almost randomly, where just now it's just structure is not there to support the shoulder with these types of activities. Your goal is to be on the world stage. To maximize the probability that that ever happens again, you likely need the surgery. The problem was he was 34, almost a master's athlete. His window was already extremely narrow and closing. And that type of rehab from reconstruction, I mean, we're talking a year to get back to feeling like yourself again, and then to get back to that level. So tack on another year and a half to probably get back to that stage, and that puts you at an age you're very likely we're going to be over the hill anyway, just on the average. when we're just looking at that. So that was another conversation where it was essentially just kind of like dwindled into retirement. And I never said you should retire. It would just started with it's probable that you will dislocate again. There's a high likelihood that you'll dislocate again. If you want to get back to the level, you maximize that likelihood by getting the surgery. That doesn't guarantee a thing. But it will at least guarantee that your shoulder is workable, for probably more workable for the rest of your life than if you didn't get that. And then that evolved into just the realization that the timeline is just not working out. So yeah, I guess that's just kind of a hard stop on a story, but it's rare that it's this like, yes, no. It's usually this kind of process that unfolds, and you just have these conversations over time. You both kind of come to it, There's still maybe like that one come to Jesus talk where you make the decision, but it's tough, it's just kind of an ongoing thing.
Quinn, I've been on the sorry, Nick, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that was really, really well said. And Eric, I think you and I are probably going to think to take this conversation in the same direction. Maybe not, but I think this is a good opportunity to reconnect with why we're doing what we're doing. Are we in this to step on stage? Are we in this to compete and win a plastic trophy? Are we in it to, why did we start doing this in the first place? And Eric, I know the story you've told a lot is the conversation you've had with Barb, where you said, if I couldn't be Mr. Natural Olympia, I wouldn't do this, or something along those lines. And then you realize, like, well, that's not right. Like that we have to do some looking inside here. And I know in my experience, I've kind of gone down that road where early in bodybuilding, it's easy to get caught up in what place you get and wanting to get that pro card and wanting to get that trophy. And then I realized that coming in second place, coming in third place, going to the shows would be the worst part of my journey, when that should be the best part. My favorite part was the day after the show, when I would go to the gym and just train again. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, if that's fun, if the 15 to 16-year-old inside of me just wants to go to the gym and lift and make improvements and get stronger, that's what I'm in it for. That's why I do it. Like, I love doing it. So I think it's important when you're dealing with an athlete at that stage. And granted, I don't have too much experience having that kind of conversation with someone. I've had people who've come to me who've already come to that realization where they say, I know I'm not going to do this anymore, but my goal right now is this. But I think it's a good opportunity to kind of realign with your why. And even if the stage wasn't there, like during COVID, right? During the pandemic, the stage is gone. So does that mean that we stop training because there's not going to be a show in 2020? No, because there could be no shows. I would still train. Because I love training, right? So I think it's important to, and sometimes even people who have a clearly defined why can get blinded sometimes by that draw of competing, and in that organized competition, where once that's gone, or once they can't compete at that level that was kind of not arbitrarily made, but artificially made almost. And the one of the recent podcasts we were talking about, gosh, I forget her name, the lifter from New Zealand. The conversation was
Evie Corrigan.
Yes, Evie. Yes, and you guys were talking about if she never competed, she would just be lifting, getting stronger, and no one would know if she's good, if she's bad. She's just kind of doing her thing, getting stronger, and she would never have that whole new view or experience of competing and being in the spotlight and being compared to others. So I think I want to echo everything that Quinn and Sam said, but then I think it's also a good opportunity to reconnect with why you're lifting. Why are you doing this? Is it to get on stage? Is it to compete in the Olympics? Or is it because there was something about it that drew you there one time? Let's get back into that. Let's focus on that. Let's have that conversation. And then I think, that may be another avenue we can kind of take that conversation.
Yeah, well said. I think you were taking in a similar direction. I was going to do it through a personal story. Stories, I should say. I've accumulated enough time under and over barbells at 37 now that I've had a few. You mentioned one of them that I wasn't going to bring up, actually, was the conversation I had with Barb when I realized, yeah, that's an important part of my motivation, but it is a risky eggs all in one basket mentality, because I do still want to compete at the very highest level in natural bodybuilding. But I also don't want to lose my connection, desire, the benefits from, and my enjoyment of lifting if that is not something I achieve, or to feel as though all this time and energy has been wasted. And that ultimately is what started me down that path. But injury is if that's a slow burn, if that's something you get to think about, have a conversation and a relationship with yourself and figure that out. Because if you're mature enough, you know that you're not going to win any bodybuilding title, in your first couple of years of training. When I had the mentality, I knew, okay, well, let's see what happens in a decade, which meant I had a decade to figure this shit out so that I wasn't still a child with my goals. However, if that's a slow burn, having your shoulder dislocate is not. You have to change your mindset in a rapid succession, or not, and suffer the consequences of being stuck in the same mindset and being at odds with reality. When I first got into weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting in 2013 and 14, I was getting a repeated, what felt like a neck strain almost every 6 weeks. And it would just pretty much happen like clockwork. And I didn't know what to do about it. I had problems. It was worth it though, because I could train around it. Fast forward to getting back into it in 2017, 2018. And I actually got neurological symptoms and lost about 60% of the strength in my right arm for a little bit. And I made a joke when I was out in Toronto with Omar. We made this joke about getting into a bar fight with these guys. And I was like, I got your back, but there's a very strong possibility I take one punch and I'm in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. So let's try to avoid this occurring. And there was a point where I was looking at, hey, if these things don't start to resolve in the next 3 months, we have to seriously consider surgery. At least that was the narrative of the professionals I was talking to. And that made me really have to consider, like, if with giving up Olympic weightlifting completely and any potential future goals I had, is that worth mitigating this risk? And there was absolutely a point where I was like, yes, I don't really want people to cut through the front of my neck and put cages around, remove, change out, give me prosthetic discs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I had to go through that process of thinking about it. I didn't need it. I focused on bodybuilding for 2 years, and then slowly and very gradually, and with a great deal of fear, have now gotten back into weightlifting, and I haven't had a neck injury in knock on wood 3 years. But it's just a very interesting experience, and much of it was informed by the whole FAI experience, where I tried to put it off, avoid it. And then I had to do it, and I had a good experience. So I have all these conflicting narratives, and it just makes me think how, while not fun, injuries are these potentially beautiful opportunities for you to really examine what are your motivations. What do you want your motivations to be? Because it's nothing like the contrast of who you think you are, how you think you'd act, and what you actually end up thinking and doing when you're faced with something that is immediate, to give you that opportunity to maybe try to be more intentional and think more deeply and ask some of those questions and have those conversations that you'd much rather not have. If we want to get a little, like if we want to talk Seneca or the 5 rings, meditating on death, the kind of metaphor there of thinking about what's the worst case scenario. Those are useful opportunities to figure out, okay, what would I do in this situation? And I think that's probably a good option. And it's something we all gonna die. Like we mentioned earlier, the equivalent of a lifter dying before they die is the day when we hit our last PR on a given movement or lift. You have to be prepared for that. We shift. My journey with my athletes as a coach has been shifting them from focusing on winning towards focusing on just progression and beating themselves, running their own race, but then eventually getting them to enjoy lifting despite the fact that race time might slow down. They can no longer beat themselves. And being able to look at the Masters lifter or the Masters bodybuilder or the Masters 3 bodybuilder and not think in the back of their mind, like, why are they here? Because if they don't get that, that means there's still some potential growing to do if they want to stay in the sport long term. There's nothing wrong with retiring and saying no. Like you said, Sam, like you mentioned, Quinn, like if you're at the top of your game, you met a lot of goals, you're proud of what you did, and you're simply not interested in competing if it's not to be competitive, so long as you're good with that, I'm good with that. But a lot of people are not good with that, and they're bitter, they're resentful. They're Al Bundy talking about how they used to had all the running back yards they ran in high school. And I think that's not a place that any of us want to be, or the people who we care about want to see them get to. So, soapbox removed, floor is open.
Nick talked about the why. It's also defining success. So health and high performance are oftentimes inversely related, or the pain experience or injury. When you're chasing high performance, you are purposely pushing thresholds and pushing boundaries. You are putting yourself at more risk. So there's this paradox where when you're strong and resilient, you're generally harder to kill, but because you're on the cutting edge of your threshold, of your physiological thresholds, you are also exposing risk every time that you do that. It's this weird paradox. And sometimes, well, a lot of times I will have to ask, what is success to you? Is it, what if, and I throw scenarios out there, what if we were able to hit PRs, but your thing was still kind of there and you still kind of felt your thing every now and then, and it came up and sometimes it affected training, but now we have these strategies to manage those pockets of time so that you don't lose substantial periods of time. But if I told you that best case scenario, you're going to perform at a high level, but you're going to have to deal with this every now and then, would you be okay with that? If their answer is yes, that's how they want to define success, then that's what I'll help them do. If their answer is no, I want to hit my PRs and be at high performance, and I never want to feel this thing that I've been feeling for the last 10 years ever again. Say, okay, well, now it's time to have a conversation about realistic expectations. What's the other paradox is now a lot of with these chronic issues, even when you pull training completely back, a lot of times when you do nothing, you feel as bad, sometimes worse. And mentally also, because now you feel weak and fragile, plus your thing is still there, and it's easier for it to pop up. So there's that too. So if you're going to feel it regardless, you might as well train hard. But that sometimes sounds very bro-ish, but if you know the athlete and you spent enough time around them and you've kind of got a feel for how their body's responding to these things long term, these are discussions that can be had. That it's just reality. If we're pushing these thresholds, you might have to deal with this every now and then that's the conversation of, is that okay? Because I don't frame my physical, I'm not a physician. My job is to not keep you alive. And I also don't frame what I do with my athletes as my job is to get you out of pain, to keep you out of pain, and to prevent the pain from ever happening again, because I can't do that. But what I can do is help you manage those situations, help you mitigate risk as much as possible while you're pushing your own boundaries, because that's what you want to do. And that's what I enjoy helping people to do. So it's just not a simple, I guess, it's not a simple scenario, but sometimes it's not, my point was, sometimes it's not about having the conversation, well, you actually can't get to where you want to be or where you were. You actually can. You just might have to deal with some stuff through that. And that's just a reframing of the reality of the process. Sometimes not. Sometimes people have their injury and they get over it and they never feel it again. And that's awesome. That happens too. But I can't predict necessarily, who that person's going to be. And the longer they have the history of it coming into my office for the first time, the lower the likelihood that it's just going to be there's going to be one day where that's the last day they ever felt it again.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And I think this is a good to kind of circle back and make sure we're picking up the theme of this. We started with someone coming in, setting some expectations.
This is Pain Science episode number 2. Sorry.
Correct. No. But I mean, honestly,
fuck.
it's no way around it. Yeah.
I didn't want it to be like that. No,
No, but we got our entry point, right? We clarified that there are a lot of things we can modify. We kind of walked through basically what that experience might be like, and finding the threshold, graded exposure, doing what we can, not focusing on necessarily what we can't, resetting expectations, getting them to understand their emotions, re-question their motivations, understand what physical therapy is and isn't, which you just brought up, Quinn. We're not here to prevent and manage and never have you have pain again. We are here to discuss what's more important to you: performance with some pain, or whatever performance is you can do with minimal pain, and structuring that guideline individually to them, and seeing how it goes. Now, since you kind of talked about recurring stuff, we've been kind of on the theme of recurring injury kind of since you brought up that example in the World Championships of the dislocated shoulder. So we've got this person now to the point where they're able to perform. There may be with some pain, their thing, but it's not catastrophic. It's not to the level of what brought them into any one of your 3 guys' offices. I think many times, and I don't know how malicious this is, I think a lot of the times in our community, it comes from wanting to take ownership and wanting to have agency. We assume that if you got hurt, you did something wrong. You didn't do your prehab. You had inappropriate volume or intensity. You weren't taking your resting or recovery seriously. You were too lean. You weren't eating enough. You didn't manage your stress. You weren't meditating. You didn't buy my detox tea. Whatever it is, somehow you bear some responsibility of not taking care of your body, taking care of your recovery, or living your life the way the internet says you should. And I think to some degree, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I would like to prevent this from happening again. I do want to have agency and empowerment and have some tools at my disposal to mitigate that risk in the future moving forward. But I think a lot of the times it's just people holding onto a safety blanket, being like, I want to believe if I do this, it won't happen again. Or, hey, you fix me now. How do I never get hurt again? What does that look like once someone has gotten back to a point where they wouldn't walk into your office? How do you help them ensure, or I should say not ensure, how do you help them lower the risk of that same problem happening again? And how often is the injury itself predictable to the degree that I think I know why this happened? And moving forward, we can probably do some things to keep certain adaptations or patterns or patterns from not recurring that might lead to this happening again. So I'll open the table up to you all. This is kind of the long-term maintenance plan of broke bro. How does he stay unbroke? Let's go with Nick. You first.
And I think that's probably one of the more important things and roles that we can play. And I think it comes down to not just going through the process to get to the end goal. It's all about learning as we go, right? So injuries, an argument with your significant other, all these type of things are opportunities to really take a look inside and figure out why did this happen? How did we get past it? And how am I going to get stronger from this moving forward? And I think by going through this process of injury and looking at injury the way that we're talking about today, it's nearly impossible not to come out the other end and be more resilient. I think the other approach where we're sort of mechanics, and the opposite of what Quinn is saying, where I would say majority of physical therapists out there will say that they treat pain and come to me, I will get rid of your pain. That type of approach where they get fixed, it's more of a, that passive, let me fix you. There's not much to be learned from that other than come to me to get fixed. But when you go through this process like we're talking about, and you get that buy-in, and you take all the steps that Eric, you just outlined that we talked about, take all those steps and get through it, I don't see how that person is not more resilient moving down the road. I don't see how this gentleman that I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, if 6 months from now he gets pain in his hip again, I don't see how he doesn't try to modify his squat for a week and then go back to his normal squat before he calls me, or he doesn't try 5 different things that we tried in the past before he calls me. So I think the best maintenance injury reduction program is just learning from your previous injuries and kind of loving that journey. Just like in bodybuilding, weightlifting, anything that we do, you don't want to just be focused on that end goal. You want to deal with the struggle and learn from it and come out with some new perspective. So I think that's really the key, is that mental resiliency that you can then apply to yourself.
Love it. Quinn?
Nick explained things beautifully. So the question is, how do we set the person up for long-term success, whether or not they ever experience pain, but kind of how do we chop off the string and let them loose and maximize the chances of success? Education, I think Nick hit it on the head. I think that's the biggest thing. It's a learning process. The process of training is a skill in and of itself. Learning how to train, learning how to make decisions on the day-to-day is a skill that you hone over time by being by journaling your training and reflecting on your decisions and reflecting on how training is going. And you have to get time under your belt doing that to even look back and see patterns. It's just like gathering enough data points to see any type of signal. So if you can teach people how to train and how to respond to certain things that happen in training, I think that's probably the biggest impact that we can have. Anecdotally, what I see with athletes long term in regards to recurrent injuries or recurrent pain experiences, let's set like a recurrent shoulder dislocation aside for a second, but let's just say it's a pain flare up. A lot of times what I'll see is if we're making smart training decisions across time, what I'm seeing is the flare-ups happen. One of 3 things happen. The flare-ups happen less often. They're not as severe when they do happen, and or they go away sooner. They're able to kind of get over that speed bump a lot faster than what used to happen. So any one of those 3 things is a success in my mind, but I make sure that they see those 3 things as successes too. So we have these exact conversations. Like, if any of these 3 things are happening, we're headed in the right direction. I don't know if we ever get to the destination. And I want to be clear before, saying like, well, I can't promise you to be pain-free, so I don't care about your pain. That's not what I'm saying. And yes, if I could flip on a light switch and guarantee that you could never experience this uncomfortable feeling that you're feeling, obviously we would choose that. But because we can't, we're going to use it as information. And so that's kind of another way that I'll frame the pain experience, because it's not just this existential emotive experience, this pain experience. Like, let's take tendinopathy, for example. When you're laying in bed and not loading the tendon, you don't feel your tendinopathic symptoms. When you do your loading test, unless there's an active inflammatory, unless you're really fucking flared up. But in general, when you load the tendon in predictable patterns, you feel your tendinopathic symptoms. So there's this consistency within that. It's then how you frame it in your head and how you perseverate on it and how you catastrophize and all these things. But the pain experience with some of these scenarios can be relatively predictable and can be explained through a biomechanical lens to some degree. That doesn't mean that we're discounting the human behind it. But to that extent, my point is that we can use the pain experience as another piece of data. So if you do a workout and you track your workouts like you should, like a good athlete that you are, and that's Monday, and then Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday you are laid up. Your thing happened again, and you're flared up like crazy. Now you can look back at Monday, maybe even more importantly, you look back at the previous week. Did you go on vacation the 2 or 3 weeks before? Like, you're starting to now see flare-ups as signal instead of this unpredictable, random occurrence that just happens out of nowhere and you have no idea what factors contributed. But if we kind of teach them how all these things can affect it, and how training dose is a dose response, how stress is a dose response, and taking time off and being unprepared and deconditioned, and then you try to, all these things. So now when they have these flare-ups, they just kind of see it differently. And it's not as, they don't inject as much emotion into it. It's still frustrating, but it's not this prolonged woe is me, what's going to happen in the future, will I ever be me again? It's no, I know they'll have a flare up, I know what happens, it's going to be pissed off for a couple of weeks, I'm going to change this and I'm going to change that, and then I'll be annoyed for 2 weeks, and then I'll move past it. And so if they can kind of just get that, I think that's a big victory, because that's where I am with training. I mean, I've got, the 3 things that are just Quinn's things. It's the anterior knee pain. Sometimes it's a neck thing, and sometimes it's a shoulder thing. And they cycle once or twice a year, and I used to inject a lot of emotion into those things, and that did not help. I'm not going to say my emotional response was the reason that I was experiencing the pain, but it sure as hell didn't help the situation. And as I've pulled that out, they still happen, but I manage things much differently, and my mindset is much different. And, your brain fully forms after the age of 25, so maybe I just wasn't ready to think in that way.
Neuroscientists are very happy right now to hear that indisputable fact. I love it. Sam, your thoughts?
I think Quinn nailed it there, and building off Nick's points, then the really last things that we covered would be everything outside of training. Quinn talked about that you should be tracking your training, tracking these other variables. And while we don't necessarily have like concrete answers for training or the rest of your life, we do have like generally reasonable information that you should be sleeping a certain amount, you should be sleeping a consistent dosage, all these other variables like how much are you drinking, do you see any spikes in relationship to when you got injured and that you went on a bender, or all these other variables like Nick mentioned, having an argument with your significant other. Like if you go across more duration of time and get more consistent with paying attention to these other variables, you have more data points to observe and see if there is a trend. In a lot of cases, we do see trends, particularly with more chronic cases where, you have a flare-up and it is more associated with these other things. But then there are cases where shit just happens and that you cannot predict every type of injury. And sometimes it's, more of an acute situation where something just shitty happens, you have to deal with it. But if you have at least other data points to consider and reflect on and kind of look at, were you less prepared to go into what you did? Did you have a period of time where you had substantially less sleep? Were you really stressed out with work and you just said, screw it, I'm going to train like I normally want to anyways? Like, do you have these other things you can reflect on to give you feedback into maybe you could learn from this situation for the future? I can't necessarily change what's already happened, but maybe I can change the way that I approach things going forward. And maybe that is a factor that comes with age, or it just comes with taking a moment to be reflective and some critical reasoning skills. And for a lot of people, it is just like a progression of the athlete and the progression of the lifter in time. Can you just step back and make it less of an emotional experience and try to get as much objective information as you can to create some semblance of a system to approach it? It's not always easy, and it can be incredibly frustrating still, but
it's really hard. We're talking about like best case scenarios in the process of this thing, but what we're really talking about is behavior change, and like attitude, belief change is some of the hardest. I mean, that's so hard. And some people are just not ready to listen. I mean, we could all probably think back to times where we were being told the thing that we now think to be closer to truth, but back then we weren't ready to hear it. And there's no time where you just like hit that inflection point and we're like, oh, now I'm woke. It's these little exposures over time that start to shift your mindset and your beliefs, if you're even open to that. And I mean, so we're talking about processes that are extremely difficult, that take a lot of time. And if a healthcare provider is listening to this right now and saying, like, I get 6 visits per this patient's insurance plan, and like I have to try to basically change this person's beliefs, create physiological adaptation, and set them up for, success 5 years down the line in 8 weeks with insurance that's, fucking the plan. It's just really, really difficult to do. But, we talk about healthcare professionals and coaches and personal and trainers, having this relationship. So ideally, even if you don't have as much time, you can hand this person off to somebody who can kind of take the reins that you trust and can see that process through. And then you're kind of there if you need them.
Well said. Gentlemen, this started with my knee hurt, and it became a journey into existential self, redefining your relationship with the iron, and finding truly where you were the whole time with that Bruce Lee model of a kick eventually just being a kick. But now it hurts your knee, but that's okay because you don't have an emotional response to the knee hurting and the kick that was just a kick, but used to be knee extension. So I love it. I think everyone who may be struggling with their thing right now hopefully gets a better insight into perhaps what the big picture roadmap looks like, even though they won't be the same streets. It won't be the same street names. It won't be the same turns. You may not even be driving on the same side of the road in your journey, but there is a map. And these gentlemen will be your guiding lights, your guiding pen lights in that cave map, as Mike T brought up at that one point. I want to give you all the opportunity to offer any closing words. And if you don't have closing words, just tell people where they can find you so they can learn more about existential risk, the pain experience, and why they should or shouldn't be doing knee extensions depending on the context. Nick, how about you? We'll start with you, buddy.
Well, I just got to say that last couple minutes there, listening to these guys speak, I was selfishly watching as if I'm watching Floyd Mayweather work a heavy bag. I mean, that was, I'm going to definitely going back to re-listen to that because that was invaluable. And I think that was, that was really special. As far as me, 3dmusclejourney.com. You can find me there. You can find me on Instagram at Nick Licameli. Strength Together online is my telehealth website there. But really just Instagram has it all there and 3D Muscle Journey. And thank you guys for having me on again. It's absolutely awesome. Like I said before, one of my favorite quotes is, if I've seen further, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And man, everyone on this call right here has done so much to make me who I am today. So it's awesome to be here. It's awesome to talk to you guys, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Sam?
Thank you for the kind words, Nick. Thanks for having me on. It's been fantastic. I'm a regular listener and really enjoy iron culture, so it's been a blast to be on. For anyone that's interested to find out more about me, I've got a website, citizenathletics.com, and then also Rehab One, which is E3 Rehab. We have lots of content that is available. Try to put out as much free stuff as we can. And thanks for having me.
Our pleasure, Sam. Last but not least,
yeah,
Dr.
thanks.
Henoch.
Okay. Thanks so much, guys. This was a lot of fun. I'm on Instagram as is the rest of the world. Quinn.Henoch DPT and all the clinical athlete channels and we created the clinical athlete directory for a lot of these problems to try to find a professional who knows a little bit more about training. A lot of them train themselves and they're healthcare professionals. So if you're looking for somebody, go on clinicalathlete.com. The directory's there. It's free. Try to find somebody in your area, and a lot of them are doing some type of remote service at this stage. And so even if they're not super close to you, if they're within state boundaries, We can call it rehab, call it physical therapy. We won't get into that rabbit hole, but yeah, all the clinical athlete channels, and then you can you shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook as well. Boom.
Love it. Omar, I don't know about you, but I just feel a supreme sense of hope and optimism, seeing that folks like this are out there doing the damn thing, helping us folks who want to pointlessly fight gravity until it hurts us, and then continue to do so despite the fact that it hurts us, but be okay with it.
Yeah.
So knowing that, I say I'm going to sleep well tonight. So why don't you take us into the sunset, my friend?
No, Eric, I feel hopeful, as you said, and I just got to note what a mirror we've had in this journey, this conversation to the Lord of the Rings, where we left Hobbiton. We finally threw in, you and myself, Sam and Frodo, where we threw the ring, Mount Doom. It actually worked. The War of the Ring was successfully ended. We came back to Hobbiton. Sauron and Wormtongue were not there, and finally, Bilbo and Frodo, Grey Havens, we're leaving the shores. We're going to the promised land. So I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Quinn. Thank you, Nick. I also think, and I'm just going to state it outright, I think there should be a sequel because I thoroughly enjoyed this, how we're able to navigate so many different topics seamlessly. And there is still, I would say, so much to uncover. I mean, it is the case where we go 2 hours, and to me, it kind of just flew by. And I think, like, I still have, not that there weren't questions answered, but I still have more questions. You know, there's still more things to talk about.
We didn't give them the ACL blueprint, which maybe next time.
Woo! Yeah, stay tuned. And hey, I know Sam's listening, so Quinn, and also Nick listens, but Quinn, we might need you with your deep baritone voice, beautiful baritone voice for our upcoming Masculinity in Crisis Tour 2021. We'll let you know about that, but don't worry. I want to thank everyone because we're at the 2-hour limit here. And we got to wage war against the sexy doctors. So if you like this episode, if you like anything about Iron Culture, you can leave a rating review on iTunes. Nothing less than 5 stars will do. We will judge you. We will fine you. And we will ostracize you. If you're on the YouTube comment section, it's up to you if you want to leave a comment, player. Like, you don't know what response we're going to give, but go ahead and try. And we'll do our best to respond. We're back every single Monday from now until we're pain-free, which will be never. So we're always here.